Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Maha Aziz. My role is to help others make sense of the world through the lens of risk. What are the threats to our stability today, and what could go wrong in the future? I teach this topic and work with graduate students at NYU, but I also share my ideas through online courses with diplomats and high schoolers around the world. I feel it's important to share my ideas with a broader audience, which is why I write books on global risk, and I consult on this topic with governments and corporates through various networks. But I also feel passionate about educating kids. This is why I drew the comic book, The Global Kid, back in 2016. It teaches kids about global risk and their activist role. And soon I'll be launching the sequel, which has virtual reality, augmented reality elements as well. So look forward to sharing that and my new book, A Global Spring, going forward. Yes, my first book, Future World Order, effectively explains our global legitimacy crisis, which began in the 2010s and I predict will deepen in the 2020s. The idea is that we have witnessed disruptions in four key areas. First, consider geopolitics. Is it still a US-led world order? We've been questioning US hegemony for over a decade, and that will continue, I feel, even in a post-Trump era. Secondly, we've witnessed a crisis of governance and even a crisis of democracy around the world in the last decade. Is democracy still the best system? I think we will continue to see a struggle in most democracies as to whether this system in its current form is working. Thirdly, there are major challenges that pose a threat to globalization. Of course, economic nationalism and populism are ongoing, but there's also this looming cloud of automation, unemployment that will persist in the 2020s and beyond. And of course, if you throw in COVID-19, it's unclear how this will unfold in the coming years. And lastly, and I think this is the most dangerous part of our global legitimacy crisis, the trends within society. Are we globalists or are we nationalists? Do we care about the other? Because what we've observed since the 2010s is a steady rise in hate, in xenophobia, and even the evolution of extremism. Again, I don't see a near-term solution for this, and that is part of the problem. Can our governments tackle this issue, this identity crisis? Do we have shared global values anymore? All of this encompasses our global legitimacy crisis. Yes, the sequel to my first book, Future World Order, will be out later this year. It is called The Global Spring, and it really considers the pandemic effect on our global legitimacy crisis. How will COVID-19 shape our geopolitics, our politics, our economy, and our society? But I also go into detail about how we are headed for more civil unrest. The level of frustration of the average citizen is going to continue to rise. If you think of the global risk that we're dealing with already, the climate crisis, COVID-19, inflation, a growing food crisis, a fuel crisis, what we are going to see is that citizens are going to be challenging their governments more, feeling that their leaders are falling short. And it will lead to a continued rise in citizen pushback against government, citizen unrest. And so what I try to do, rather than be incredibly bleak in the book about our future, is try to offer some strategies. How do we take control in terms of the future of our politics? What strategies can we use to ease the legitimacy crisis that has been exacerbated by COVID-19? Maybe it's more women in politics. Maybe it's a more defined political role for other types of influencers, the activist youth protester, the activist billionaire. the technocrat. And so I try to really encourage the reader to have vision for where we could be headed. What is the future of our geopolitics, our politics, our economy, and society, looking at specific strategy. And so I hope it's a good guide for the 2020s for my readers and in subsequent decades as well. It's important to reflect on where we're headed. What could be the significant threats to our stability in the coming year and even the coming decade? Every year, my grad students and I at NYU and crowdsourced consultancy Wikistrat for the last 5 years have been brainstorming the key risks for the coming year. And the usual suspects always come up: proxy wars in places like Syria, Iraq, a global debt crisis, the US-China competition, the North Korean threat. That will persist. But what will be significant in the coming year and probably beyond that we perhaps haven't given enough focus to is the mental health crisis that has been brought about by COVID-19. We collectively experienced more anxiety and even depression during the lockdown and beyond. More so, I think, according to the WHO, it has posed the greatest threat to our mental health since the Second World War. The longer term effect, the social consequences of the pandemic, sadly will likely bleed into society and will persist in the coming year. I also think it's worth highlighting the terrorism factor. Everyone knows that the world is more unstable now because there's one country, Afghanistan, that is led by an extremist group, the Taliban. This potentially can be a game changer for our ongoing struggle with extremism, because it's potentially giving a sense of empowerment to other terrorist groups to be more aggressive, to dream that they can also take over their territories or even their governments. And I think that will be something that we will need to observe, track, study for the coming year and years. Beyond that, let's not forget the evolution of extremism. Beyond Islamist extremism, we have Buddhist extremism, Hindu extremism, far-right extremism, and there's no clear strategy to counter it. So this will be a significant game changer. I think long-term, we have to worry about digital inequality. There's so much debate about the tech world order and so much discussion about how AI is going to reorient our economies and our lives. But will that be across the world? We will have to contend with digital inequality going forward, which potentially can lead to more unrest, as I said earlier, a global spring. Yes, I think in the context of a crisis of political legitimacy around the world, where governments are struggling, they're falling short to tackle our global risks. This is an opportunity for entrepreneurs, for businesses to fill the gap with innovative solutions. So I think there is a space for non-state actors to tackle key risks or key issues and highlight or promote, for instance, the role of women in our economies, in our local or global economies. As many studies have indicated, there is potentially millions or billions of dollars that could be added to the global economy if women are involved. So a focus on that would make sense. If a business or entrepreneur could come up with the solution for the climate crisis, that would be a game changer for the world, and of course, profitable. I also think it's worth highlighting the role of cryptocurrency. We've seen that Wall Street is taking an interest in it. This is just going to be an ongoing trend. And can we use cryptocurrency to tackle a lot of our significant risks, whether it's to do with creating opportunity for refugees, whether it's to do with elevating the global economy? I think that will be an interesting space to explore. And I also feel that going forward, we're going to see the emergence of new types of influencers and even public intellectuals. In my first book, I talked about how the activist billionaire is actually in many ways fulfilling the role of the public intellectual. They understand where our societies are headed and our economies are headed because of technology. But there's a space for others to also chime in and perhaps be inspirational public intellectuals for us in a world that is craving leadership, in a world where there's no significant political leadership, at least from my perspective. So there is opportunity. And again, non-state actors like businesses, entrepreneurs can really play a key role in tackling these risks going forward. My near-term goal is to launch my new book, Global Spring, and my comic book, The Global Kid, the world's first VR/AR political comic book. But my ongoing agenda is simply to help others make sense of the world so they are better prepared to navigate a pandemic era and beyond. This is my responsibility as a social scientist, and exploring this and sharing it with diverse audiences is what I hope to continue to do.